Good evening, everyone. So today is our last stream in which we'll try to analyze the actual election results. They're not final yet because the absentee votes haven't been counted yet, but we have very good estimations of what these results are. And Professor Avram Diskin is joining me again, that we'll try to look at the result together and make sense of it. Good evening, Professor Diskin.
Good evening, Ephraim.
Yeah, so let me put here on the screen the table of the results as they are now. So it's more or less final results of the vote before the absentee votes were counted, those double envelopes. And actually, there are quite a lot of them. It's about 500,000. But like the majority of votes have been counted. And so the distribution of seats at the moment is that the largest party is Likud with 32 seats. Netanyahu camp at the moment enjoy the majority of 65 seats. It's the four lists on the top. And there are two parties that haven't crossed the threshold. It's Meretz with so far 0 seats, and Balad also 0 seats. But according to the data, there is still some chance that Meretz will cross the threshold because it's quite close to it. So Professor Diskin, what's your first take on these results? Maybe we'll first discuss whether these results may change significantly after the absentee votes are counted tomorrow, I suppose.
I believe that no real changes are going to take place. As you mentioned before, the only party that can really make a major change is Meretz. It is supported now by 3.2, almost 3.2% of the valid votes, and the threshold is 3.25. So we are not talking about too many seats, but we are talking about 4 Knesset members, because once you overcome the threshold, you get 4 seats out of 120. That will come, generally speaking, on the expense of other parties which already overcame the threshold, and it might reduce the majority of the potential coalition headed by Netanyahu, but the coalition will still have a majority of at least 63 seats out of 120. So really it's a new era, and that will probably end the series of elections and instability that we suffered in Israel since actually the beginning of 2019. So that's the 5th election, and now we have quite decisive results.
And you say there is no chance that Balad will be able to cross the threshold.
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. There's no chance to that. I know this table, and the numbers to look at the numbers under the light blue title. You have the number of seats, 32 for Likud with almost 24% of the seats. And if we talk about the bottom of the numbers, you have three numbers. You have the last number, 1.45%, is for several parties. So, of course, each of these parties is very far from reaching the threshold. 1.2 is also very, very far from the threshold. And the two parties which are quite close are Balad, that's the Arab nationalist party, actually secular party, but really the most extreme on national affairs, with 2.9%. I don't think that they really have any chance to get close to 3.25%, and Meretz is quite close. It's really needs just a fraction of a percent in order to, so it is quite close. I don't believe that it will reach it, but there is a chance. It's really quite close. We'll see about it. There are many reasons why I don't think that they will overcome the threshold, because we know some features about the absentee votes, those who didn't vote at their polling stations, which is close to their regular home, etc., etc. So it's possible, but I would say most chances is that Meretz will not overcome the threshold. If it will, instead of zero, you see that number zero sits next to 3.19. We'll have to change it to 4, and we'll have to deduct 4 from other parties, and it's premature to make the calculations, but about 2 will be deducted from the parties that support Netanyahu and 2 from the other parties.
So basically, at the moment, the picture is that Netanyahu may feel himself quite secure as a victor of this election, and already begin to think about possible coalition formation.
Yes, I think that's quite clear what kind of coalition we are going to have. It was declared before the elections, and all the 4 parties which are supposed to join the coalition declared their loyalty, their potential loyalty to a coalition headed by Netanyahu. And each of these parties declared not only that they will go with Netanyahu, they cooperated in several ways during the campaign. And also, all the leaders of these parties announced that they are not going to join any other coalition but a coalition headed by Netanyahu. So we know the coalition. Okay, now you have the list. It's very helpful what you put right now. So we are talking first of all about the Likud, the main party in that bloc, with 32 seats. The religious Zionism, as you call it, is a right-wing party, which is a combination of 2.5 small parties, but they are right of Likud. Most of the people who support it are religious people, but not all of them. Anyway, it should be put right of Likud. And the 2 other parties, just next to Likud, are Shas and Torah Judaism. These are 2 ultra-Orthodox parties, which were very successful. All these parties, by the way, all the 4 parties at the top of the table got more seats than expected by most public opinion polls during the campaign. Every one of them really improved its situation on election day. And if you sum the numbers, you can see that the number of the 4 parties at the top is 65 out of 120. So a very solid majority. And we know that all over the world, narrow coalitions, as long as they are not too polarized from within, there are no internal cleavages, and if there are small coalitions, they even tend to be more stable than large coalitions. So it looks as Netanyahu is going to form a coalition of these 4 parties, which might be, according to political science findings for the last half a century at least, could be quite a stable coalition.
That's what you've always taught us, that the narrow majority coalitions are most stable. However, judging from Netanyahu's previous coalition behavior, he didn't really believe in this, and he always tried to enlarge his coalition.
Which brought about the collapse of his coalition. So why he enlarged it and asked a party which is listed here, Israel Our Home, headed by Lieberman. Once he made his coalition larger by asking Lieberman to join, almost in a very short period, it destabilized the coalition, and that really began the saga that we are facing now for almost 4 years.
So you believe that actually Netanyahu's calculations and preferences in this respect were quite error, so that it would be better for him, purely in coalition stability terms, always opt for narrow coalition rather than broader coalition. And then I wonder now, do you think he will try also to invite an additional party to this coalition? And is it possible, is it likely that there will be some other party rather than these four that now or later might join the government?
The stability of the government is not the single consideration that Netanyahu or other leaders all over the world they should take into consideration. They have to consider other issues. And Netanyahu, when he had the opportunity, and we are talking about his first term as a prime minister between 96 and 99, and later when he had a comeback and returned as a prime minister in 2009, he always tried to have partners in his coalition from the center, and his natural tendency. So it might be because he believes that the government should represent also in the left. Maybe he had other considerations such as how his coalition is going to be looked upon by foreign observers. Maybe he didn't want to rely on extreme religious or extreme right-wingers. He wanted to balance it. But anyway, his personal tendency is not to have a coalition the kind we are going to have in a few days. We are going to have a narrow coalition with all the four right-wing parties, and his natural tendency is not to rely, in spite of what I said, and he is aware of what I said. Okay? I know that he's aware of that for a fact. In spite of that, he might try to have additional partners, either single Knesset members that will defect their factions from other parties, and if it's a party, a solid party, I think everybody talks about the party of the statist camp. You translated it, headed by Benny Gantz, former chief of staff of the IDF, that includes some quite left-wing members, also right-wing members. So the 12 members may also, or some of them may also join the coalition at a later stage. But this is not expected in the first stage. In the first stage, the four parties at the top are going to form the coalition almost for sure. And I think that the procedure will be quite swift, and it will produce a nucleus, at least, or maybe not a nucleus, but a stable government with these four parties.
In this respect, I would like to ask a question about religious Zionism, because it's, as you said, a conglomerate of 2 or 2.5 parties. So basically, it's alliance of 2 leaders. One is Bezalel Smotrich, and the other is Itamar Ben-Gvir. And Itamar Ben-Gvir finds himself in a kind of unusual position for himself. He's now a partner for coalition building process. And so we do not yet know what his coalition building habits are. How will he behave? Will be a kind of when the coalition negotiations begin, will it be easy to deal with him, or will he put demands that Netanyahu will find unacceptable, and this will make some difficulties for him to form the government within this narrow right-wing coalition?
So let me say a few words about this person. So the religious Zionism bloc of mainly two parties is headed by two people. One of them was already a minister of transportation, a very successful one, by the way, Bezalel Smotrich. So he's the head of one branch, and the more extreme branch is headed by Itamar Ben-Gvir. Itamar Ben-Gvir is portrayed by the world media and also by the Israeli media as someone who is very close to be a racist, an extreme person who made expressions in the past, and he did make expressions in the past, which could have been interpreted as supporting terrorism against Arabs, etc. So he is portrayed as a very extreme person. I think, according to his behavior, not only during the campaign, but in recent years, that it's kind of shared portrayal of Itamar Ben-Gvir. When people are quoting him, people are talking about his behavior when he was a teenager, when he was 17, and supported really very, very extreme movements, political movements in Israel. Now we're talking about a grown-up person, I think in his early 50s, something like that, and he is a provocative person, no question about that. But I think that you cannot hear from him extreme expressions. For instance, in some of his rallies, the audience, some of the audience shouted, "Death to the Arabs, death to the Arabs." Okay, really very extreme racist slogans. And he always said, no, 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 I'm not against Arabs. I'm not against Arabs at all. They are equal citizens. I think that he believed that. But I am about being very rough against Arab terrorists, okay, including death punishment to terrorists, etc., etc. So he really tried to emphasize the fact that you cannot regard him anymore as a racist. What is going to be his behavior when he is part of the coalition and a minister in the government, we'll have to wait and see. But I'm not very pessimistic about his behavior. Okay, I'm very far from being a supporter of Itamar Ben-Gvir, very far from that. On many issues, I hold really opposite issues, but I don't think that he's as extreme or as dangerous as people portrayed him. And I hope, and I believe that concerning his provocative behavior, once you have a ministerial job, you usually moderate. I am not so sure about it, but I really hope, and I also believe that that's going to be the case. So this is really the troublemaker of the future coalition. And by the way, I had today a talk with a member of the other party in religious Zionism, the leading party in religious Zionism, and he and of course I expressed my doubts about Itamar Ben-Gvir and some of his colleagues in that list, and he said, well, it's very, very far from what people think. He's not like that anymore, and you cannot really judge him according to his behavior when he was a teenager, a wild teenager. It's another person, but he is going to be a troublemaker in that coalition. And he's one of the reasons, people like him are one of the reasons why Netanyahu always look for partners in the center of the Israeli political system or even on the left.
I would distinguish here between two different questions. One was that the one that you answered to is about what kind of views and its implications for the Israeli society and politics in general. What I wonder is his coalition behavior, because there is tendency, at least as I can see, in the past, of the parties which are to the right of Likud, to be really a problematic members of the coalition in terms of its stability. For example, once Naftali Bennett was regarded as an extreme right, and we know now that his views are not extreme right at all. He moved to the left quite significantly. Nevertheless, as a coalition member, he was doing things which kind of are regarded as a breach of discipline, because he was kind of maverick person. So, because we want to maybe to understand how stable that coalition will be, or how easy it will be for Netanyahu to form it, in this respect, do you think that Itamar Ben-Gvir will kind of make troubles? Will be that kind of maverick, undisciplined member of the coalition, or will he actually be part of the larger faction and the government and just do his job?
Well, let me say two things about it. First of all, there is the question of personality, which I already addressed.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let me say something general before I talk about the extreme ideas, etc., etc. When you have a narrow government, a minimal winning coalition government, that's what we have, that's what we call this kind of... A minimal winning coalition government is a government where if any one of the partners decides to defect, the coalition loses its majority. And if you look at the numbers, okay, if any one of the four parties decides not to cooperate with the coalition anymore, even the 8 numbers of the Torah Judaism, the government collapsed. We know that in spite of that power of small parties within the coalition, usually the fact that the government collapsed once you have a problem with one of the components just unifies, stabilizes the coalition. Now about stands. I think that Bennett was aware of his power as a person that decides whether Netanyahu will have a coalition or not. After the elections of 2015, he realized what I just said, that everything depends on him, even before he joined the coalition. And he made an ultimatum to Netanyahu. Okay? I was in the room, so to say, not physically, but on the telephone. I was talking to people involved in it, and they said, I'm going to give him an offer he can't refuse. I want these 2 ministries, and if not, we're going to elections. So once again, it's a matter of personality. So that was the case with Bennett, and as we know, he was not that extreme, and he cooperated with the most leftist parties in the outgoing coalition that Israel had. I don't know about Itamar Ben-Gvir. I don't know. I'm not an expert of his stance. I do know that he had very extreme expressions. To sum up the conversation that I had with a senior member of the other party in religious Zionism, really a senior person, he portrays Itamar Ben-Gvir. Don't tell him that because it might change his behavior. But he more or less described him as a sheep disguised as a wolf, not the
I
other
see.
way around. And we'll have to wait and see and hope that not because of the stability of the coalition, but because of the stability of Israel and the moderation always needed for policies of any government, especially in Israel. Let's hope that this interpretation will prove itself, that there will be provocations, all kinds of slogans, but in practice, I hope that he will be cooperative and relatively moderate.
Okay, and now to a slightly different question. So what we have here is in terms of the seats, there is a clear victory, clear advantage to the right, 65 versus 55. But in terms of voters, the differences are narrow. So basically, one of the reasons why there is such a gap is that two parties that belong to anti-Netanyahu camp, they are projected not to cross the threshold. So if we look at the distribution of preferences in a society according to this election, what would you make of it? Can we say that we can find a certain preference for right wing, or is it a tie? Is this victory of the right wing, is it accidental because that the left parties didn't manage to unite, or does it really reflect deeper trends in Israeli society which move it further to the right?
So first of all, let me say something technical about the gap. The gap now is about between the parties that are expected to be part of the coalition and all the other parties, which are on the center or the left of the coalition. The difference is 3,500 votes, really a tiny number, even less than 35 number, but something like that. And we are talking about 4 million voters or something like that, which is really, really a very, very tiny number. However, let me say that in the past, always the right-wing parties wasted more votes than the left-wing parties. Always, that's a rule. And in 1992, the Rabin government, the second Rabin government, which was formed after the election, was supported by a majority of 61 members, including, by the way, two Arab-supported parties. Okay, so they had 61 seats, in spite of the fact that they had less votes than the right-wing voters. So in 1992, not only that the right-wing parties wasted more valid votes because of the threshold, etc., which was very low at that time, only 1.5%, but nevertheless they lost many, many votes, especially of two parties, which overcame the threshold of 1%, the previous threshold, but didn't. So you can have that even in a very, very proportional system like we have in Israel, worked against the right-wing parties. What happened this time was that those who ran the Likud campaign, including the prime minister, were very much aware of that situation. They were very much aware of that situation, and they were very focused about it and about solving it. And there is a change in the law that I suggested, according to which surplus agreements could have been made between more than two parties. Say, for instance, between all the four parties at the top of this list. And if one of the parties do not overcome the threshold, the votes will be considered after all, and it will increase the seats of those parties that overcame the threshold. So I suggested that reform about 8 years ago for the first time, and I suggested it once again this time. And I can tell you for a fact that Netanyahu liked the idea, but a senior member in the Likud said that he's against changing the law this time, maybe later on, because it's more fair to have such a procedure. And usually most parties, especially left-wing parties, didn't want it. Large left-wing parties, small left-wing parties wanted that change in the law. And that senior member in the Likud gambled on what really happened at the end of the day. He gambled on the fact that there will be no wasted vote, almost no wasted votes on the right. There are few, by the way, but almost no wasted votes on the right, and that some parties on the left might have trouble with overcoming the threshold, which finally happened. So they really had that consideration in their mind, and for the first time, the right-wing parties, after many decades, organized the agreements and the implementation of the election law in order not to waste votes. So that gamble succeeded, and it was, something that I can say the name of that person, but I will not. Someone thought about it in advance, and that's what happened.
Okay, and so then we can characterize the situation like the society is still split. So if there have been small changes in voters' attitude, next election may produce very different results. So it just really was very close game.
I really don't think so. The country is divided very sharply, and it's polarized presently around the personality of Netanyahu. The blocs are not called in Israel the left-wing bloc and the right-wing bloc, but they are called the Bibistic camp, those who support Bibi and those who say anything
just not Bibi.
Just not Bibi, anything but Bibi. So it's personality. If you talk about stands, I think that the stands of the supporters and the leaders of the parties are not that far from each other. For instance, if you talk about the Arab-Israeli conflict, today, I would say that the majority of leaders and the majority of Israelis, of voters, believe on one hand that if peace is possible, Israel should be relatively generous and give up territories and support the establishment of a Palestinian state. Even Netanyahu himself said so several times. But at the same time, the same people believe that unfortunately there is no partner on the Palestinian side, and that peace is not achievable. You hear this even from very far parties on the left, such as Meretz, that didn't overcome the threshold. I know these people, I'm talking to them. So the stands are not that far away. Israel is not that split the way you portray. And if you look at the results, let me say, I really don't want to mention names, but I was talking to someone who is really at the top of the main opposition party, Yesh Atid, and that person said, "Well, should be considered right winger or any issue." Okay, I'm not a centrist, even. I'm not a leftist. I really tend to be on the right. If you talk about Israel at home, for many, many years, Lieberman was considered as one of the more extreme people on the right, not a leftist. So there are many issues. You know, if you talk about religion, these two parties, Israel, Our Home, and the Yesh Atid, are very much anti-clerical, you say. I don't know if really anti-religious, but anti-clerical parties. The real left parties on if you talk about the Jewish parties, the only really left-wing party in the Knesset is the Labour Party, with only 4 seats. It's unbelievable because this party by itself was at a certain point of time in 1969, it had almost half of the seats, controlled almost half of the seats of the Knesset by itself. And that was the party that established really the state of Israel. It's very, very sad in many ways that it shrank. The real left-wing Jewish party is only Labor with only 4 seats. And if you talk about the two Arab parties, Ra'am and Hadash, Hadash is half of Hadash. It's not really Hadash. It's also a coalition of two parties. So two of the members of Hadash itself are communists. One of them a member in your department at the university.
Yeah, that's right. My colleague.
Yeah, and a former student of mine. Quite a maverick, I might say, even as a student, not only as a politician. A Jewish member, by the way,
yeah.
An Arab-supported party, but one of the 5 seats is, and the other party, Ram, is not a left-wing party. I would say, in a way, it's even a right-wing party. It's a conservative party because it is a party. The main issue for that party is Islam. It's quite a religious party of Islam believers, and on day-to-day issues, they tend to be very moderate. They cooperated with the outgoing coalition, and some people say there is an argument about that they were cooperate with Netanyahu if Netanyahu would have formed a coalition after the 21 elections that we have, the elections to the previous Knesset. So there is a division, there is a split, there is a lot of hatred. It's very unfortunate, but the real stands are not that distant from each other, and I really hope that somehow the hatred between the different groups of voters and politicians will be moderated. I'm not so sure that it will happen, but I definitely hope that it will happen.
You emphasize now the affinity of many substantive positions of these politicians and parties. And in this context, I would like to ask you the following question. I have an impression, it's my personal impression, but tell me what you think. Like, if I were asked before the election, what would happen if Netanyahu wins and returns to be prime minister? So the scenario I would think about was about the left parties and media affiliated with left being very, very harsh and even challenging the legitimacy of him returning to as prime minister, because the trial is still ongoing. And when I watched yesterday TV discussions and I read what people say and what people publish today, I actually discovered that they, at least by now, they sounded quite moderate. It's the victory of Netanyahu is recognized. No one at the moment challenges his right to form the government because he's under the trial, and it looks like both in the coalition and opposition kind of came in terms with this situation, and they consider, okay, what will we do in political terms, not in terms of personal delegitimization. Could it happen actually that because of this election and this result, we will kind of overcome this extreme polarization around the question of one person, and we'll be able to deal more with substantive issues?
First of all, let me say, you mentioned the media, okay, the reaction of the media. So first of all, let me say that in Israel, like in most Western countries, the media tends to the left. I would say more than 90% of the anchor men and anchor women on TV are left-wingers. I would say that, for instance, Meretz, probably if you would have had only media people voting, probably would have a support of almost 50% of the votes among media people, and by the way, also of other intellectuals, such as university people, especially in the humanities. And I'll tell you something, I think that it's not only the legitimacy. First of all, let me say a word about the trial. Okay? It should be said. I think that if you follow what happens in court, it looks very bad for the prosecution. It looks very bad. And maybe the trial will last for 5 years or 10 years. It will last forever because the list of witnesses is over 300 witnesses of the prosecution. But almost every witness so far, I think we had close to 20 so far, really proved, in my opinion, maybe I'm biased, but I really follow the minutes of the discussions at the court very closely. Almost every witness of the prosecution really proved. So and because of that, by the way, the trial was not a part of the campaign of the parties. You know, in the past, I said the criminal, you know, is breach of trust and I don't know, bribery. It was not mentioned during the campaign. So it was not mentioned because there are answers. You can quote the witnesses.
If I understand your point correctly, what you say is that this question of the trial receded during the campaign, and now not because the leaders of anti-Netanyahu bloc didn't want to emphasize it, but because actually the public doesn't begin kind of to have more and more doubts about this trial.
Maybe they didn't use it because they're stupid. They could have used it and win the elections. I don't want to be, you know, to make a forecast post factum and make it. I don't know why, but that's my feeling. My feeling is that they tried it in the past successfully, and they decided to skip it and not to use it this time. And not only one of them, everyone. Sometimes, you know, it was mentioned briefly, but it was really not at the center of the I think that Netanyahu's chances to be totally acquitted are very high. They are not certain. I don't know, you know, but from what I follow so far, it looks that his chances are very, very good. So that's one thing I have to say. And you have to cope with the results. So you have decisive results. It's not a narrow result. So they say, everyone says now on the media, the point that you mentioned that we discussed before, it's only a margin of 3,500 votes, and it's not as decisive as it looks, etc., etc. By the way, a point which was never discussed after elections before, when the right-wing parties wasted more votes. But now they do mention it. So it's a kind of a challenge to the legitimacy of the coalition, but they know the answer that I just gave you. They know that the most influential government headed by Labor for so many years, the Rabin government, which I supported, by the way, okay, or say partly I supported it at least. Immediately you can mention that they didn't have majority at all. There was a majority against that coalition. So they know the answers. So I think they realize the facts. If there was a margin of only one seat, 61 to 59, the reaction would have been different. If the trial was going on differently, the result would have been different. So what people say now is they don't say Netanyahu, they have a better target, really a better target that can be criticized in a much easier way, and that's Ben Gvir, which we discussed before. He is a real extremist with really a very problematic past, at least when he was a teenager. So they say, look at that, we are going to have a coalition with Ben Gvir, and maybe he's going to be in charge of the police, domestic security, we call it in Israel. I don't know if that was going to be his post in the coalition, but that's what he wants to be. So they attack these kind of things, and it's quite natural, and we have to accept that. As I said before, it's almost a natural law that the media and most of the intellectuals will tend to the left. It's really something that characterizes not Israel, but almost every single Western democracy. It happens in Italy and Switzerland and Sweden and the United States, as we all know, and the exception are right-wingers in the media. So they do what they do. It's very difficult to be balanced and to say, to look at things not in an objective way. Okay, objective doesn't mean necessarily neutral. Okay, I don't think that I'm neutral, but I'm trying to be objective. I'm trying to understand, as I think was very clear in that discussion that we had. In these elections, by the way, I helped the most extreme right-wing party, the religious Zionism, in their primaries, okay, on the professional side of it. I was paid for doing that job, and I readily made that help. And at the same time, during the last campaign, I tried very hardly to promote an Arab candidate in Meretz, okay? And I endorsed him and used my endorsement in order to be elected unsuccessfully, okay, because I'm not that popular probably all around. But it didn't help him much, and anyway, Meretz did not get any representation. So I try to understand everybody, and I really think that we need very badly the cooperation between everybody, by the way, including Arabs.
Yeah.
Arabs are citizens in Israel.
Yeah, in this respect, actually, this was my last issue that I wanted to raise. Because as we know, there were some contacts between Likud and Netanyahu and Ram before the previous election. And there was some talk that they might, under some conditions, even support the government or even join some kind of coalition. And this idea, and then in the end, they joined the current coalition, the left-wing government, and Likud, during its campaign, strongly criticized that this current government was relying on Ram. So my question is this. Do you think that maybe not now, but at some point in the future, the right-wing coalition will return to its attempts before the election to 2021 to include an Arab party, probably Ram, in some form to its coalition? Is it actually possible?
I'll tell you, there are other moves that can be made by the government.
Okay.
And I'll tell you something that I support very strongly, and I do talk to coalition people. I do talk to right-wing leaders. We have this law that describes Israel, the Jewish homeland of the homeland of the Jewish people.
Mm-hmm.
And many Arabs and many other people, Jews, attacked that law and said that, well, it discriminates Arab citizens, which is not the case, by the way. Okay, there is nothing which is said there that violate the individual rights of Arabs. It is even said, for instance, about the language, an article that was attacked brutally by the media. It is said that nothing in the rights, the lingual rights of Arabic in Israel will be heard by that law. It's going to be the same as it was before the law. So it even strengthened the position of Arabic, because now it's included in a basic law. And anyway, I'm a great supporter of including an amendment in that law stating that the sovereignty of the state of Israel is shared equally by all its citizens, regardless of their religion and nationality, which is a fact, by the way. Everybody can vote, and everybody can be elected in Israel if he's an Arab or Jew, as long as he's a citizen, 21 years old, etc., whether he served in the army or not. Total equality. I think that should be included in order to emphasize the fact that there is no contradiction between the fact that Israel really belongs equally between all its citizens, if they are Jews or not, Jews with left-wing stands or right-wing stands, Arab who are religious or secular, nationalistic or not, everybody has the same share in the sovereignty of the state of Israel. That can be made. And by the way, when I was talking to it today, for instance, with that member of the most extreme right-wing party, okay, someone very senior, I didn't hear any refusal. Okay, he didn't challenge, he said, no, that's not possible. So I think that's something that can be made. To include Arab parties in the coalition, I don't think that that's possible, because some right-wingers, even some Likud members, will not be tolerant to that. Given what we had in the most recent past, not to talk about the 100 years of bloody conflict, but I think that's not really possible. You know, always there are surprises in politics, and in Israel you have surprise every hour or something like that. I don't think that that's possible. But changing the law, emphasizing the rights of Arabs one-sidedly by the right-wing parties, I think that's possible, and I support it, and I promote the idea. And as I said before, just today, I had the opportunity to explain that to quite an extreme nationalist right-winger in the potential Knesset, who will be a minister for sure in the coming government.
Okay, so I think we've covered most of the topics for today. And I wish to thank you for your participation and for your very, very interesting comments and explanations that we all learned much from them. And we will continue to monitor the situation, and we'll see if there are any surprises. Thank you very much, Professor Diskin, for
thank you very much, Professor Ephraim Podoksik, my dear friend and brilliant intellectual.
Thank you for your compliment. And so have a nice evening, and hopefully we'll have other opportunities to talk here on my stream.
Thank you very much, and all the best.
Thank you. Yeah, so just the series of my streams about this election is finished. We, as you can hear from this conversation, we expect that no significant changes will take place in the results, even after the absentee votes are counted. If there are some very significant changes, I will initiate another evening where we can discuss them if something changes. But if nothing significant happens, so just I wish to thank all of you who was following this stream either live or recorded. These all streams remain on my YouTube channel that you can always watch them. And we'll meet, who knows, maybe next election. And if Professor Diskin is right, this election will take place not so soon, not as soon as we already become used to. Thank you very much and have a good day.